Hey YouTube, Awesome Rider here. Welcome to my next video in my top 5 Ranger ranking series where I'm ranking the different Rangers of every color. Had a bunch of ranking series videos and videos like this planned in honor of the 30th anniversary, but they're going to continue beyond that because I started the original top 5 colors based off of Once and Always, and it took me forever to roll those out. So this series is inspired by the 30th anniversary, but we'll continue after it because I just like to do top ranking videos anyway. So this one is going to be 6th, which I actually already thought that I filmed for some reason, and I did not. Thought it was next on the docket, but let's go ahead and get started. So as we usually do, we got some honorable mentions. So I'm only gonna have one honorable mention for this, just for the sake of time, which is actually Antonio from Samurai. I know that the Neo Saban era and stuff is hated, but I always really enjoyed Antonio. I found him to be a fun, bright spot in the series, a fun presence. Both him and Robo Knight were kind of characters where they kind of took the outline and inspiration from the Sentai and then made it their own a little bit, and I by far preferred Antonio to Genta, and I just found he was a joy. The whole making use of him being oh, it's a golden moment, it's so gold, was just honestly fun, and I always really liked him. Not enough to put him in the top 5, but definitely one where he's kind of a fond favorite. And at number 5 is actually the Gold Ranger from Zeo, but very specifically the Gold Ranger when he was a mystery. Not Trey Gold Ranger, not Jason Gold Ranger, but Gold Ranger when he was a mystery. I guess a bit Jason when he was Gold Ranger. It was kind of cool having Jason as Gold and having that flipped dynamic of Tommy and Jason where, one was the leader once and one was the Sixth Ranger and then it swapped. I feel like they could have done more with that, and if they ever by some miracle get to Zeo in the comics, that would be such a cool dynamic to play. So I guess that does play a little bit of part in it. But for me, I feel like the mystery Gold Ranger, when he was just literally just this character with a cool voice and a badass mystery, was my favorite version, which I know is kind of the shallow version, but it kind of represents, when I was younger, when a new season would come out and the toys would pop on the shelves and they would just be this blank slate of just these really cool new Rangers, and the possibilities were endless. And that was kind of extra for the Sixth Ranger. You'd see the Sixth Ranger figure, which usually came out far before their debut, and the Morpher, and you just kind of see their image, and they were just kind of this cool blank slate, kind of representing the template of the cool potential of a Sixth Ranger. And I feel like when the Gold Ranger was literally just a cool voice and suit, it kind of represented that. But I will admit, I'll add on a little bit of the Jason dynamic in regards to, that was a pretty cool and unique dynamic for, a longer running series where you can do stuff like that. I wasn't so hot on Trey, even though he's the true Gold Ranger and they're all lying to us. Number 4 is Cam from Ninja Storm as the Green Samurai Ranger. A lot of people expected a mention or honorable mention of him in the Green Ranger list, which he wasn't there because I knew he was going to be here. So Cam is just a great character, a great example of an established character becoming a Ranger, and they really did a good job of establishing his character and doing kind of a slow build in the background, where you not only established him as kind of, the tech, not kind of, but he was the tech expert and sort of secondary mentor to the team, but you established that he wasn't a weakling or anything. He could fight, he could take care of himself. He very easily could have been selected to be one of the original candidates to Rangers, but his father was overprotective of him. But I love that very early on in the series they showcased that. I think I recall at least 1 or 2 scenes where I think he was with Tori or something talking, and they got attacked by Kelzax, and it displayed that he could fight early on. And it was a really great story and progression of his dad finally letting him be a Ranger, and getting this backstory involved with Lothar and his mother was just really well done. And not to mention, I love that afterwards he did stuff like create cybercam so he could be both places at once. He was just a really good Ranger that was really well built up to and really well liked, and again, much like a lot of the characters in Ninja Storm and Disney era, felt like an actual normal human being. Number 3, maybe controversial to rank him a little higher, but is Merck, the Lunar Wolf Ranger from Wild Forest. I always just thought this was a cool spin on the evil Sixth Ranger story. Now, admittedly, Merrick's acting is a little bit weirdly stiff and comedic. It's one of those performances that's straight out of the room sometimes. But I just really more like him for the overall story idea of, instead of it being a Sixth Ranger showing up, it's first of this villain, not Loki, that's his name in Ga Ranger, but Loki's on my mind because of Loki the series. What's his name? Zenaku. Zenaku shows up as this just badass wolf general who can steal their Zords and use their Zords, and it was, in a lot of ways on paper, if you strip that away, very much like a classic Sixth Ranger storyline of a villain Sixth Ranger at first. But I like the unique spin of it being a villain first, and he was kind of trapped in there, kind of like a wolf's curse. I like the backstory of it, and then I also liked that afterwards, he, even though he mostly ended up working with the team, he had this guilt over what he did as Zenaku, and as such, he didn't always want to work with the team and didn't feel like he was worthy. And kind of like the who's going to be on number 2, I like that more nuanced touch of a little bit more complexity instead of just, oh, everything's fine now. So I don't know, I just always really liked Merrick. Number 2 is Eric, the Red Quantum Ranger, or I guess he's red because he was in Forever Red, but yeah, the Quantum Ranger. And again, as I just mentioned with Zenaku and sort of guilt and stuff like that with Merrick, I liked the more nuanced and more human feeling characters. And I think Eric was such a great Sixth Ranger because he was so different. Talking about different Sixth Ranger storylines, kind of veering away from like an evil Sixth Ranger storyline, he kind of existed right in the middle of an antagonist Sixth Ranger coming in and then joining the team, or just a Sixth Ranger simply joining the team, where he never really joined the team until like the finale arc. And he kind of had his own goals and ambitions, and he led the Silver Guardians. He even tried to steal the team at one point, and he was an interesting character because he could be more aggressive, he could be very selfish, and it was like this journey to see him become a better person, but he was a very flawed person. It also made a great kind of rival to Wes, showing his sort of resentment to Wes for his privilege, but Wes really wasn't like that. I mean, he kind of was, but he wasn't like a stuck-up rich kid like Eric thought, but it made this interesting kind of two sides of a coin dynamic between them, and there's a good reason why he's so popular, because he was not only such a unique character, but again, as the franchise evolved and moved away from cookie cutter characters, it was nice to have a character that felt more flawed and learned, and he even then was never perfect. And I really liked that about that. Kind of like with Connor. I know it's a kind of different situation, but they both kind of remind me of each other in the sense that they are imperfect people that became Rangers, that became better people, but they never all of a sudden were like, I'm cured now I'm an mmpr like mannequin. It was like, no, they still weren't perfect. They still acted like themselves. Like, again, there's a reason he's one of the most popular. And number one, a bit of a generic choice, but is Tommy Oliver as the Green/White Ranger. I mean, this isn't, of course, first is best, but I think that he did set the template for Six Rangers in a lot of ways, and even though his story is kind of more interesting on paper than it was shown in the show, where it's very, you know, kiddie, moral lesson type of stuff, and I think more complex when they actually delved into the guilt and the resentment from the team. Like, you know, the first arc in Boom Comics is about Tommy's feeling guilt and the Rangers are still mistrusting, so the comics gave us a much more in-depth version of that. Also a much more triumphant story of him gaining the white light powers and overcoming his fears in his past. But I always liked his story, even like on paper, and I was kind of filling in the blanks myself when I was younger, of, you know, starting out as this evil Sixth Ranger, being chosen by Rita, and then doing as much good as he possibly could as the Green Ranger until the powers run out, and then being rewarded by finally being chosen by Zordon on his own and becoming the White Ranger. And like, unlike most Six Rangers that are evil after this, you know, you just turn evil, but you don't need, or turn good, you don't need to get a new suit. But I always thought it was cool that he got a new Ranger mantle that like physically represented his redemption and his moving on from that. I always thought that was something really cool. In a way, talking about it, like talking it out, kind of reminds me how sometimes, though it's a different situation, but in Rider, you'll get a new form that will symbolize some sort of character growth or milestone. And I always just like that aspect, because it is that typical Six Ranger story of once he was evil and then turned good, but, you know, you do get this arc where he finally is chosen and he gets to have this suit that physically represents him being good. Not to mention, he then goes on to play a much more pivotal role, which I think also makes him a unique Sixth Ranger in the sense that he sends that generic template, but because he's a character that was a part of not only the initial long-running MMPR story, but the longer-term running story of PR as a character that kept coming back, you know, even for being a mentor in the comics, it sets him as having a more epic and fleshed-out, unique storyline. But that is just my list. Let me know your list in the comments as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps, ring that bell so you get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.